prejudice against Catholics is the deepest bias in the history of the American people.
Whoa! You're saying that prejudice against Catholics is deeper than the prejudice against, I don't know, say, African Americans or homosexuals. I I hope I can just let that stand on its own.
When I see mobs tearing down and desecrating statues of a great Catholic saint, mind you, canonized just 5 years ago by Pope Francis, how can I not see the ugly specter of anti-Catholicism raising its head?
Because nobody cares that he was Catholic. It's what he did. What people care about and what people object to is the fact that he represents and was complicit in the systematic, essentially eradication of indigenous culture in the country.
The government of Ventura, California, which is in my pastoral region, is now considering removing the image of Padre Serra from the seal and from the badges of the Ventura police officers. Friends, this entire effort to erase the memory of Serra...
Okay, people aren't trying to erase the memory of Serra. People are trying to erase the exaltation of him. These images aren't... People aren't trying to get rid of, history books about that include, Junipero Serra. They're trying to get rid of the ways in our or the things in our culture that exalt and honor him as a great person when we know what he was a part of and what he was complicit in.
To state it bluntly, Junipero Serra is being used as a convenient scapegoat for certain abuses inherent to 18th century Spanish colonialism. Were such abuses real? Yes. Did people suffer from them? Yes, of course. But was Father Serra personally responsible for them? Of course not.
Whether or not Junipero Serra was the dude, lashing or beating Native Americans isn't the point. The point is that he was involved in this effort. I mean, if you imagine applying our moral standard to anyone else from that time, imagine yourself going back to that time, you wouldn't just be like, oh, well, that's bad, but, I'm not personally doing it. You wouldn't take part. You wouldn't be out in California trying to convert people and trying to essentially get them to abandon their culture and adopt Catholicism. Especially when you know that that movement is chock full of injustices and brutalities that are being perpetuated by the people on your side.
I won't deny for a moment that Serra probably engaged in certain disciplinary practices that we would rightfully regard as morally questionable, or that he was in certain unhappy ways a child of his time and culture. But the overwhelming evidence suggests that he was a great friend of the native peoples, that he sought time and again to protect them from mistreatment by civil authorities, that he presided over missions where the indigenous were taught useful skills and were introduced to the Christian faith.
The fact that he did some good things isn't really the point. I'm sure he did plenty of good things. People aren't tearing down his statues because he didn't do enough good things. People are tearing down his statues because of the bad things that he did and the bad things that he was complicit in or implicitly supported by his support for this whole movement to convert the native peoples.
From the missions established by Junipero Serra came much of the political and cultural life of the state of California. Many of our greatest cities, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, and yes, Ventura, were built on the foundation of the missions.
Yes. And all of the great cultural aspects of Native American societies in that place, they were all wiped out. Sure, now we have our modern European Californian society and culture, and we've lost a culture that was there before us and was destroyed violently by people like Junipero Serra. That's the problem.
The spread of the Christian faith in this part of the world took place largely because of the work of Junipero Serra and his colleagues. And this is a good thing. Jesus told his first followers to go into all the world and preach the good news. Not as a message of oppression, but of spiritual liberation.
Yeah, but it was a message of oppression. The oppression is exactly how they spread it. And Bishop Barron is voicing his confusion or concern that people are thinking of Junipero Serra as a bad person or because he was tangentially involved in this stuff. That's why Bishop Barron just said it, that he believes, as did Serra and as do, I would imagine, probably most traditional Catholics today, that this was a good thing. Maybe not the violence. I think Bishop Barron would say the violence wasn't a good thing. But absent all the violence and the oppression, replacing their culture, their religion, their beliefs with Catholicism is a good thing. This is one of the fundamental objections that most people have who are tearing down statues of Serra.
Moreover, in that same period, the Ku Klux Klan, which was active not just in the South, but in many northern cities as well, endeavored to terrorize blacks and Jews, of course, but also, it's easy to forget, Catholics. If you doubt that this sort of knee-jerk opposition to Catholicism endured well into the 20th century, I'd recommend you consult some of the histrionic rhetoric used by the opponents of John F. Kennedy during the presidential campaign of 1960.
I don't doubt that there is and probably always has been anti-Catholic prejudice by some people in the United States. You just have to be really careful that you're not putting it anywhere near the level of the societal and cultural and religious opposition to Native Americans or women or Jews or blacks. Because the fact that you can pick out some political party or something that didn't like Roman Catholics is interesting. But Catholics do not have the type of socioeconomic, cultural, systemic opposition to them and their culture that people like African Americans have had. There is no contest here.
The Dean of American Historians, Arthur Schlesinger Sr., summed up this trend in his oft-repeated remark, quote, "Prejudice against Catholics is the deepest bias in the history of the American people."
Yeah. I'm just going to assume that quote is taken out of context, or I'm somehow not understanding it, because there's no way that somebody could legitimately believe that.
So, when I see mobs tearing down and desecrating statues of a great Catholic saint, mind you, canonized just 5 years ago by Pope Francis, how can I not see the ugly specter of anti-Catholicism raising its head? Friends, we're passing through a Jacobin moment in our cultural history, and such periods are dangerous indeed, for there's no clear indication of what can stop their momentum. So in this case, what's next? Shall we tear down the missions themselves, the moral equivalents of death camps? Shall we call into question the Catholic faith and institutions that Junipero Serra brought to these shores?
Probably, yes.
One can only hope that cooler heads will prevail, and that responsible people might bring to an end this ridiculous and, frankly, dangerous attempt to cancel Padre Serra. Thanks so much.
The thing that always frustrates me about people, more conservative and religious types, say like Bishop Barron, is that he's so concerned, he feels the need to make a video about the destruction of some statues of Sarah. And he's so concerned about these statues and about this sentiment of people who think that he was a bad guy. And shouldn't someone who follows the teachings of Jesus, shouldn't they be more concerned about the oppression behind this stuff? Like, shouldn't they be more concerned about the systemic, about what, even if you don't think that this statue represents, oppression towards Native Americans or white supremacy, then can you at least acknowledge that, like, what these people who are throwing down statues think that this represents is a really big problem? And the backlash against statues like this reflects an attitude, a cultural attitude held by minorities that they have spent so long in a society which is constantly glorifying people and institutions and religions who are responsible for terrible oppression and genocide and racism. And even if we grant him that Junipero Serra was a great guy, which I certainly don't, but even if we granted that, can you at least try to understand where these people are coming from, understand their plight, and be more concerned with fighting to end the racism and the oppression than you are with protecting a dude's statue? Is this really what Jesus would be concerned about? Would he be concerned about the statue? Or would he be concerned about the countless Native American lives and black lives and gay lives and trans lives that have been taken by people who, if not Sarah, people a lot like Sarah, who held a lot of the same beliefs and the same ideas that if you don't believe Catholicism, if you don't believe Christianity, there's something wrong, and I have to go and I have to change that so that I can save you. I just don't think he's focused on the right thing here. And I think the fact that he is dedicating more time and more energy to focusing on the statue, I think that says something about the priorities that the Catholic Church has. Because he is supposed to represent the Church. He is an ambassador of the Church. I don't think this is the right message you should be sending to your parishioners.